Welcome to Raising a Beautiful Mind, the podcast where we have real conversations about youth mental health to empower families and transform systems. With guest Dr. Nikki Finn, a mental and relational health advocate. All right, hello. Welcome back to another episode. This week we have Dr. Nikki Finn with us, a passionate child mental and relational health education advocate, and crafting inclusive and relationally safe spaces where children can learn, live, work, and play. She has been in the field for over 20 years with kids. Her writing, she's self-published, she does social emotional consulting, she provides restorative and transition services, and she's a mom of child with diverse abilities. And hopefully somewhere in there, Nikki, you sleep too, right?
Somewhere.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your title of Child Mental and Relational Health Education Advocate? It's not one you hear all the time. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean?
Well, in my work with schools, I started working in schools, by the way, in child nutrition services. So I was an ultimate lunch lady. I supervised school cafeterias and really found that there were a lot of mental health needs going unmet because I wrote grants for kids as part of my work in child nutrition, school nutrition services, for child wellness, for them to have fresh fruits and vegetables every day. And I found that a lot of kids were coming to school hungry. And then, of course, a lot of the parents or adults or teachers would be like, well, school nutrition is not feeding them well, and there's a lot of sugar, and the lunches are horrible. And then it got me thinking, I'm like, but really, like, I was like that, I think, too, in the beginning, because I have my culinary certificate and loved food and scratch made my son's baby food, all that stuff, and the whole 9 yards. And so I could see their point, but also in seeing some of the kids struggling with attendance issues or testing issues, behavioral issues, it all came down to food and safety. And to me, the intersection in that was mental health and also education. So like there was interconnecting dots that was just like, okay, I got to do something. Like how? What can I, like what can I offer to these students? So I would do things like cater family dinners, free family dinners with fruits and vegetables in them, have fruit baskets at the office for kids who came in. And then I found after about, I don't know, 4 years of doing this kind of work, that my impact on students was somewhat limited in being in child nutrition. And so I thought, what else can I do to really serve students? Because I was seeing myself in some of these kids. Like I was raised where I felt unheard, I felt unseen, I felt invisible. As the oldest of 8, I was told, give your toy to your sibling because you're the oldest. And I was just like, that's bogus. Like, why do I have to sacrifice this toy, this thing that I really wanted? I didn't think it was much of an ask, but it was. It was up to me to make everything else okay. And I see a lot of that in school systems. And so I went on, got my doctorate in education leadership, and that coupled with my master's degree in public health worked beautifully to work in relationships and behavior. And so that's where relational health comes in. And that's kind of where it, I guess what it has to do with social emotional learning, because you have the social aspects of relationships, you have the emotional aspect of relationships, and it's all about how we relate to things, that happen, how we relate to our traumas, how we relate to our experiences, our education, our teachers, the adult around us, and most of all, how we relate to ourselves.
Ooh.
Yes. And so the health educator in me was just like, behavior change is individual, not one size fits all. And then I see all these cookie cutter methods of social emotional learning being done or curriculums being done, and we have to do this to the masses when everybody's trauma and how it manifests, or everybody's needs and how they manifest, don't look the same. We
Yeah.
don't all start education at the same point, you
Yeah.
know? And so how could I like dig into that a little bit? And so I really found a home in working with kids in in school suspension, after school programs, teen court, um, I guess penalties, kind of to say our programs, and I loved it because I
Mhm.
could relate to these kids because a lot of them that were being sent to me were misunderstood,
Mhm.
um, just didn't have any fault of their own except for having a diverse ability. Because many kids with diverse abilities are misunderstood and being penalized just for
Mhm.
having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, you
Mm.
know? And that's how I felt, going through my life and reflecting back on not my young adult years, but also my childhood years.
Yeah. So you've said so many good things. Let's talk about when you say diverse abilities, what does that mean to you?
Well, a lot of people might say disabilities,
Okay.
for just because I think it's long standing
Mhm.
disabilities and how that looks. I like to say it as diverse abilities because at the crux of it, we all have different needs. And people can call them disabilities, but I call them diverse abilities because that's where our power lies, right? In their uniqueness,
Mhm.
in the individuality that we have. And it's not something to be limited by. But
Mhm.
yet, I see so many people using the term disability as something limiting, as something negative, as something that could, kind of, I guess, perpetuate learned helplessness, right? And disempowerment. And so I just decided I'm not going to use that term. I think everybody has different needs, and that's okay. And I think too that the term disability, I mean, just from my experience in working with schools, it seems that has come from those disabilities that are visible, somebody in a wheelchair, somebody
Mhm.
that, has missing limbs, or however you might want to phrase that or categorize that. But what about the kids that have invisible disabilities, or those ones that are not readily apparent, and what I call invisible trouble? And so I'm seeing a lot of that is the kids
Mhm.
that have this invisible trouble. I'm seeing really smart kids get in trouble. I'm seeing hyper responsible kids get in trouble. I'm seeing
Mhm.
people pleasing kids get in trouble, perfectionists get in
Mhm.
trouble. And I think it could be because they understand how to get through the loopholes of the system to make it
Mhm.
work for them. Because I mean, think about it. In
Mhm.
school, you're praised for what? Showing up. That's all you
Mhm.
got to do. And you're
Mhm.
praised for getting a good grade.
Getting a
And
good
attendance
grade.
is an award, right?
Mhm.
So that's all I got to do. And
Mhm.
why would I choose something different if I want to fit in? If I don't want to be picked on by the teacher or my classmates. And so if I don't have any friends, and the people around me that I idolize or want to be friends with, they're smoking and drinking and getting into fights, and that's how I see them use their power, I'm going to do the same thing because I want to fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
you
you're
have
seeing this self-abandonment happening, and I see it in kids with diverse abilities, or, like people say, with disabilities.
yeah. So I have so many questions I want to ask you. Okay, so you mentioned before, and you started to talk about this now too, about kids' behaviors being reactions to situations, and there's a lot of complexity, right? So when I'm working with families, I would say the number one thing I hear from families and schools that they're struggling with are challenging behaviors. I would be interested if that's what you see and hear too. And what does that look like when you start to unpack it? I mean, there's so much you can talk about right now. I'm asking like 50 questions into one, really.
No,
But
go ahead.
talk about the challenging behavior piece, because what I'm hearing from you is you look at it with a really in-depth lens, and that there's more that lies beneath the surface when it comes to behaviors. Is that what you're seeing too with schools and families behaviors?
That's what I'm saying. It's time to get out the magnifying glass, okay? Because what challenging behaviors looks like to other people don't look like challenging behaviors to me. They look like normal responses to somebody that might have ADHD or PTSD. Like, okay, let's take for example, let me give you an example. In the classroom, you have rows of seating, and oftentimes kids will go in the back of the rows and they all want to sit in the back. If a teacher says, everybody come up to the front, there's no sitting in the back, you're now threatening somebody's safety if they have PTSD. They're sitting in the back because they're always they're hyper vigilant and always looking for a way to escape a situation. But if you don't know that, then, and if you're just sometimes people say it's a challenging behavior because it doesn't match what the teacher wants or what the adult wants, right? The good children are the ones who listen, who are quiet, who don't cause problems. But that's where that invisible trauma lies, or that invisible trouble lies, because they've been taught to kind of keep it in. But, and so then take hoodies. Okay, hoodies are a big one for me because schools don't like kids to wear hoodies. Thing is that with kids with PTSD, low self-esteem, low confidence, that's their invisibility cloak. And now you're threatening their safety when you won't let them put their hoodies on.
Well, and you just said it a second ago, the good kids. Isn't that interesting that we chain meaning and we attach labels, good and bad, right? And I hear you saying like we need to dig deeper than that.
Right. There's a lot of root causes, and that's what I get at with relational education. So I'm all about roots, realignment, and relationships. So that's what I look at, in reflecting on my own life. I know a lot of the things I accepted in my life is what I was taught to accept. Right. So we get what we tolerate. If we learn to tolerate people pleasing or bad relationships or people shaming us because maybe we're being bullied at school by either an adult or a child, then that is a thing on our mental health, right? And where I see a lot of the intersection in mental health and education, because a lot of people will tell me they're totally different, and I'm like, I beg to differ, because school and social and relationship kind of settings, like the social organism is a school, right? And we have such an opportunity to work on the relational well-being of our students. This is why conflicts happen, because there's none of this. Like conflict resolution, restorative justice approaches can be great, but social, emotional, and relational well-being has to happen first.
Why?
Okay, because you have to have the let's just take a fifth grader, might not understand their behavior whatsoever, but they're getting penalized for it. Well, let's say in sixth grade they enter into the social emotional learning skill class, or work with me to some degree. They start to learn about why they're behaving that way. That's social emotional learning. That's like creating self-awareness. That's like giving language so they can have a voice to say, this is why I do this.
Yeah. And I would
even, it's okay.
Right. And I would even like take it a step beyond that, is that one of the things I think as adults that the biggest false assumptions that we go with is that kids and adults just will figure it out, that they'll just know the skills to be successful. And when I'm working with adults and they'll say to me, but in my day, we didn't need that and we turned out fine. And I say, let's turn on the news tonight. How many adults do we see behaving well to really say, yeah, we all turned out fine? employability skills. They 92% of CEOs were surveyed, and 92% of them said they wish that their employees would come in with stronger soft skills, which are really those social emotional learning skills: how self-awareness, how to relate to others, problem solving, communication, coping skills, stress management. And when we don't explicitly teach those, like you're saying, we miss the opportunity to build a strong foundation so that young people can then also become adults that have emotional regulation, that know how to navigate stressful situations. And I think we see the consequences not having that every time we flip on the news or drive down rush hour traffic and people are flipping each other off as they drive, right?
Right. And you're talking about, in essence, the relational skills that I do when I work with kids in transition. So a lot of the times, that's my other point, is that these kids most of the time are getting in trouble because they haven't had the right support in transitions, like going from middle school to high school, elementary school to middle school. That's a lot to deal with. Now,
Oh,
if you have a child that has moved across country, or then you're adding something else. I've even seen and worked with kids that have had, like, I just know of kids that have had sexual abuse. That's huge. That's huge barrier to get in the way of learning and success and everything. And to escape it or numb out, of course, that child is very well likely to have an eating disorder, to say yes to addiction, to not have boundaries. You know what I mean? And so that is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. But when we just say they were smoking in the bathroom and we write them up and do our
right.
disciplinary form and suspend them, is it giving them a chance? Are
Well,
we giving a chance to the relationship?
right. And that's also a skill deficit, right? If we don't teach coping, if we don't make sure that mental health is addressed and those basic needs are addressed, young people, adults will find ways to cope, whether it's with booze, sex, self-harm, gambling, all sorts of behavior. We might not like behavior, but it's a form of communication when we have nothing else or we don't.
Well, right. But the thing is, and I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Keep going.
The thing is that what we say to kids and what they see us do, two different things most of the time. Think about those. Think about those. That we can want the child to change or to make different choices, but if we're not making them and they don't see a role model for how that happens, I mean, is that you're going to be a broken record, and then you're going to come and complain to me, because that's what parents do. They come and complain to me because they're a broken record and their child won't listen. I'm like, well, you just basically said what the problem is. You're still telling them. You have to do something different. You cannot just sit there and tell them. So who is the problem? It's not the child.
Right. What do they
The
say? The
child.
definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and
Over and
expecting a
over
different
again.
result.
But the thing is that, see, there's a lot of comfort in that, right? Because it excuses adults from taking the accountability they need to take to say, that's what I said, that I told them I don't want them to drink, but yet, like last year, there was a child who told me that his mom broke their foot because she was so drunk she fell off into a creek or something, and I'm just like, is this what we need to do? But that is like so socially acceptable. And also, I think that drinking and making sort of impulsive choices sometimes is traditional.
It is. And when we talk about mental
It's
health
popular.
right. And when we talk about mental health of young people, and we talk about social emotional learning of young people, and we talk about emotional intelligence or EQ of young people, you're right. We have to also talk about it for adults. One of the best books I have read was Dr. Mark Brackett's Permission to Feel. He's out of the Yale Emotional Center for Emotional Intelligence. And as I was reading that book, I was like, damn, like I have a long way to go on my own EQ, because there were so many pieces that I was like, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. And I never connected those dots. And I think as adults that were never also taught those pieces, we have to now be catching up and training ourselves in order to adequately help kids, because you can't teach kids if you're deficit and your own EQ.
And this is a beautiful segment to talk about catching up. You said adults need to catch up. So many times I hear, especially with COVID and COVID reentry issues and coming back from school to COVID, like, I mean, let's say COVID's still existing, right? But yet they say kids need to catch up. And I just said, kids don't need to catch up. They're not ready. And if the teachers aren't ready to deal with these changing dynamics, or trauma dynamics, or mental health dynamics, relational dynamics, then they're going to keep doing the same thing. Right. And so it's funny how you use the word catch up with adults, when I always hear about the catch up needs to happen on part of the students, but where is the adult accountability in that?
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
So when we talk about social emotional learning, that has become a very controversial topic. And I didn't realize that it would ever become a controversial topic until a few years ago. There started to be articles, and there's a growing movement that's chaining social emotional learning to making kids be gay, or critical race theory, or all sorts of other really bizarre things that, I've spent my career becoming, as knowledgeable as I can about all of these pieces. And I've never heard in any circles, any of those things, people trying to do those things when it comes to SEL. But I'm curious, what's your take on the SEL controversy? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's another attempt at power and control, to not give student voice. You can say that it's about identity. Well, think about the dismantling of identities kids have had from people pleasing or perfectionism, or abandoning themselves to listen to what parents say, or making them go to school when they really have a lot of anxiety around it because of safety issues. You know what I mean? And so I think in a lot of ways, social emotional learning is an empowerment model, is an empowerment approach to giving people voice and choice, right? To what they will and will not tolerate, what they will and will not be okay with, and coming into their own identity. I know, as somebody who implicitly had my identity dismantled, and I see other kids around who do the same thing, because people pleasing is a survival mechanism. There's trauma present. There is this feeling of safety from doing it. There's this comfort that is gonna work out, and then it becomes a pattern, and it becomes a habit. Social emotional learning is giving people the language, I think, to know what is going on, and it affects not just today, but like you said, with jobs, college readiness. I mean, a lot of kids are dropping out of college, not doing well in college either, just the same as jobs, because they don't know what they want. They haven't had a chance to experiment what they want. And that social emotional learning allows an experimentation lab, right? It allows you to come as you are. It allows you to say, yeah, I'm this way. Yeah, I'm not that way, And so a lot of times I hear, well, kids always have to do what they don't want to do. It's just a part of life. True. It is a part of life. However, does that mean that we don't listen to what their needs are and try to match them? Does that mean that we don't show up emotionally and validate that, yeah, this situation sucks, or or do we just put them in counseling and put them, let the counselor handle it, because we don't know what to do,
right.
And so we have to look at so many of the moving parts, and why are people against it? So I know from my own healing experience and in my own recovery from trauma that people do what they get a racket, a payoff to do. So they cause a racket, but there's always a payoff, and so, like, if you're looking at somebody who likes to blame, that's a racket, right? The blame creates drama. When you have somebody communicate your needs for you, that's triangulation, that creates drama. But both of those excuse that person from looking at themselves. That's a payoff.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so a lot of times what troubles people, they're getting a payoff from that. They're
Hmm.
giving, like when I first learned to set boundaries,
Yeah.
people got pissed off. They
Yeah.
didn't want to deal with me anymore. I
Mm.
shed a lot of friends and
Yeah.
people got mad because it it was working for them that I
Yeah.
didn't have boundaries.
Right. Right.
And I think that that could be the same for social emotional learning. And that's also a reason why a lot of times people are more receptive to relational education or
Mhm.
relational, because it's about relationships. But then yet, I mean, none of these concepts are real simple, right? They have
Yeah.
layers on layers of
Oh,
and
yeah.
layers, and so it's hard to just be like, "Hey, dig into
Yeah.
my layers and I'm the layer girl," like,
Yeah.
let's work with this. But it's
I
all
love
about the
that.
relationship that we have around us.
Mhm.
What is it about the relationship you have with social emotional learning that turns you against it?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. What is the relationship you have with SEL that turns you against it?
That's the
Or
question.
or what and with that relationship, what do you really know about it? Because I think that's one of the
Right.
things that there's misinformation, and it's really easy, especially in the advent of social media, for me to create a narrative about any term, and whether it's true or not, because of social media, I can hijack something and perpetuate it. And we live in a world that, and this continues to, I continue to try to understand how we got to this place and where we're going with it, where grounding things in fact and evidence, we have somehow even created question with that. The sky's blue. No, it's not. It's really orange. You all just think it's blue. And then people go out down that rabbit hole. That's hard for me. And I'm still struggling with understanding that, because I think when it comes to SEL, there's a lot of narratives, but there's one that's really grounded in evidence and science and research. And so for me to talk about anything but that, I struggle with that. How do you, where do you
Yeah,
go?
yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I understand because there's so many times I think people see the problem and they just end up seeing me as the problem because I'm the one who's bringing this knowledge to them that they don't want to face,
Yeah.
or I'm the one that is threatening their way of being, what they found acceptable, uncomfortable. And my authenticity I've had to accept is threatening.
Mm,
My want for change can be threatening
yeah.
because, I mean, you look at trauma, that's traditional because it's been passed down from family to family to family for decades. So it's
Hmm.
like acceptable to deal with, You can't turn on a TV show, I don't feel like, without seeing somebody drinking their problems,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so you have to look at some of the marketing around it, some of what's been framed as acceptable and not acceptable, but really it's those critical self inquiry kind of questions like, why do I have a problem with this? And I've had to do the same thing. I've walked in many rooms and I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't even want to know and be on my level that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And if they know that it's a problem, they want to do what they've always done to do it. And people will be like, well, it's so much time to do social emotional learning, or it's so much time. I'm like, well, how much time is it for you to keep writing discipline forms? Aren't you
Hmm.
tired of grounding your kid? Aren't you tired of
Hmm.
like saying the same thing? And I'm like, isn't that time?
Right. Right.
So how are you choosing? What are your choices and how you spend your time? And that's a lot of what I do in some of the presentations that I do for schools is choice making and looking
Hmm.
at the power of the in between choices because so
Hmm.
many people look at the black and white, the this or
Hmm.
that, the binary,
Yeah.
thinking it's right or wrong, it's yes or no. And that's where a lot of relational issues exist because we're not looking for that mighty middle. Those other
Yeah.
choices that are not visible but could be visible if we dared look at ourselves.
One of the things that you talked about earlier, and it goes with this too, is about safety, identity, traumas, and I think you do this in some of your advocacy too, is whether it's as parents or systems, we have to be careful because we can also create traumatic situations for young people as much as they can create them for us too. What do you say to parents, to systems? How do you help them navigate that, to be aware of it, to prevent it? And you mentioned some of it when we talk about in the education world, multi-tiered systems of support. When we put in the tier one, when we put in high levels of prevention, we can reduce the amount of behaviors, the things that require more intensive response. What does that look like when you're working with parents in schools?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think that well, my approach is different for different people in different situations. Of course, I
Sure.
think that goes without saying, but um I I will test things out, like looking at where and how teachers set boundaries or how adults around them set boundaries. And a lot of times I'm finding that adults around, like whether they're parents or teachers or other caregivers, they think it's their job to save kids and even with disabilities. And so there's a type of martyrship in that,
Mm.
and that martyrship is like, I know what's best, I know what's better, I've done this, and this is what
Mhm.
works for all these other kids, so this
Right. This
works
what
for
worked for
this.
me. Mhm.
And, so there's a martyrship that comes with that. And then two, I think that I've seen schools cross boundaries multiple times and
Mhm.
abuse their power, like in custody cases, for
Mhm.
instance, because kids look different during the school day than they do at home.
Mhm.
They know what's acceptable at school and what's
Mhm.
not, and if
Mhm.
it's acceptable that they're people please, of course they're not going to show any
Mhm.
problems.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean? And so if you're only looking at your part of the world and you're seeing, well, guess what? Seeing is only your perception, because what
Mhm.
lens are you using to see?
Mhm. Yeah.
And also, what about all this other? So like I always hear, well, perception is reality. I'm like, no, your perception is your reality, but that's not the
Mhm.
reality that's actually happening unless we're going to work together and collaborate.
Yeah.
I've had school systems before where they adopted a restorative justice um kind of program, and for people to come in, and I asked them to work with me, and the school principal called them and was just like, no, you're not doing that. And I'm just like, you just got this grant for restorative justice, is that to make you look good? Like, where's the teeth?
And they
Where's
didn't
the
wanna
follow
do
through?
they got the grant, but they didn't wanna do restorative justice? So what did they wanna
They
do with
weren't
the
gonna do
grant?
it, they weren't gonna do it, they weren't gonna do it.
So then why'd they get the
um
grant? Why spend
I
all
don't
that
know, but
time?
I've seen that happen a lot. I've gotten a grant for another school system for $75,000 for a big health program, and they send the money back, you
Hmm.
know? So, because who got the position they didn't like. Um, yeah, I mean, but this is the thing. I'm not trying to downplay schools, and I'm not trying to like downplay adults, but these are things that happen when we don't look at ourselves and when we
Mhm.
don't question, is this really important?
Yeah.
Is What is it that I'm doing that is perpetuating this situation? What
Sure.
can make this better? At what point? And to me, I find that it's pain. The more like people have a tipping point, and to me, it was pain. It
Mhm.
has to cause enough pain
Mhm.
to throw money about it or to do
Yeah.
something different. It has to solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's not a big deal. I'm not, people are not necessarily going to want to solve the problem
Mhm.
if it's always worked for them for one reason or another, to
Mhm.
like send a discipline form or whatever. And I've learned too with this martyrship, it allows people to shame others. And
Mhm.
then they feel better about themselves, because when
Mhm.
people shame others, they feel better about themselves. It's a
Yeah.
judgment. It's
Yeah.
a judgment. And also, that is a lot of trauma. That comes a lot of it from trauma and family dysfunction, you
Right.
know?
Well, and I think you just started to talk about this a few minutes ago, that I want to make sure that we don't go down a negative rabbit hole when it comes to adults,
Right.
because when we look at the needs of students, we also have to look at the needs of adults, whether it's educators and
Exactly.
families, because, and one of the things that I think we talk about the least, I'm not a huge fan of the term self-care because I believe that it's a really commercialized term and people feel like I just take a bath and I light a candle and I'm good. And
Right.
I think it's more than that. And part of self-care and part of, if I'm going to work in a classroom, and part of parenting is when we show up to the table, if we have our own traumas, if we have our own stressors, if we have our own mental health issues, if we have not learned stress and coping skills, if we do not have self-efficacy because we have too much work and not enough support to get it done well, and high expectations, and we've never been trained with high needs kids, it's a recipe for disaster. And to me, that is self-care, right? So when you're working with educators and you're working with parents, how do you help them navigate and uplift them? Because I imagine you're working with a ton of educators and families that are trying to, we're all on a journey, right? Like, I feel like I call myself sometimes, my nickname is the professional train wreck, because we don't wear signs that say like I'm dealing with the same shit you all are dealing with, right? And you and I are both parents of kids that have some neurodiversity. And so we've walked that walk too, of trying to balance it all. So how does that look when you're working with adults? What do you tell them? What do you do for them?
Well, one of the things that I've done, like, let me say, I think it was a couple of years ago, a family had consulted with me to work with their child. They were having a lot of issues in the classroom and mainly running away, which we call elopement.
Mhm.
And it turns out the child had PTSD and there were some relational needs not being met. So one of the things that I did was, of course, I worked one on one with the child, and I have my own lived experience with PTSD, so I don't try to hide behind, like just say, "Oh, I did this education, I did this license, so you have to listen to me." I actually have lived experience, so I was just like, "Okay, this is my ball game. Like this is my wheelhouse. I can do something here." And so I worked with them for, I think, after 3 sessions, or well, each session, I would do like homework with them. I would observe some things that were going on that I saw, and then I would do I would give them all free teacher parent write ups, like about what I was seeing, what worked, what
Okay.
didn't, etc., etc. And I basically, because seeing is believing, right? So
Mhm.
I showed them what was going on, like what was happening, so they could discern what they wanted to do. And so how that looked like with this one particular child, like they had a problem with worksheets. A lot of kids have a problem with worksheets. I have a problem with worksheets, if I'm coming down to it, but that's not the way a lot of kids learn. And that's not a
Mhm.
lot of ways to create meaning in the learning, right?
Yeah.
And especially with kids with neurodiverse needs,
Mhm.
they don't learn that way.
Yeah.
And forcing them to learn that way is basically telling them that their way is wrong.
Right. Who likes
And
worksheets? Like, neurodiverse or not, like, who likes a worksheet?
I don't even, and they don't even need homework because they have a lot to deal with. They need to be doing
Yeah.
social emotional learning after school hours.
Mhm.
So anyways, I would work with them, show them different ways. And I was very student centered. So I just let students kind of like show me like where they're at, and then we come up with an idea, a plan, and then after like 3 sessions, the kids got the one-on-one care they needed in the schools. And I didn't know the parent was sharing my write-ups with teachers, but she was. And so at that point, that child ended up, it was a blessing. It was such a miracle. Ended
Mhm.
up having a leadership role in the kindergarten class. They were a third grader. And so
Yeah.
I was just like, well, a lot of times with neurodiverse kids, they need to be given a chance to lead.
Yeah, purpose.
And
Mhm.
and so the kindergarten teacher found a way for the child to lead during the school day, which created meaning, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't want to run away anymore because they
Mhm.
had meaning. They had
Mhm.
meaning. They were able to reignite that.
Mhm.
Um, and find some importance, some value for being at school. And yeah, so then the kindergarten teacher, which was so cool, I was doing a conference for a trauma informed community in this one system, and she said, I want you to come talk to my kindergarten class. And so she was seeing it, it was like the presentations, it's like sharing the work that I'm doing with the students. I also do like kind of it's almost like a needs assessment.
Mhm.
Um, but it's based off of their, what I'm observing and what I'm
Mhm.
seeing and what I know from what they tell me. And then I'll develop a sheet about how they might need to ask for help,
Mhm.
what supports they might need,
Mhm.
and then the teacher can laminate that and use it in the classroom. Now, some kids don't want
Yeah.
to ask for help. So
Mhm.
some kids are embarrassed to ask for help, right? Like
Mhm.
it's weak to ask for help in
Mhm.
some settings, right? Or in
Right.
some
Right.
homes, like that's the message they get.
Mhm.
But if they have this laminated sheet right here that I've done for them,
Mhm.
the teacher can walk by their desk and the kid can point to something on the sheet.
Yeah. Yeah. Those visual cues are so wonderful, especially when you're trying to navigate all of the emotional overload in your brain.
Well, you can't just ask people to ask for help.
Mhm.
Think about if there was ever a time you struggled for asking for help. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy as somebody is saying, well, for me, it wasn't as easy as somebody being like, ask for help.
Right.
Well, I've been turned down before.
Right.
Like
Right. Well,
I've been told you can help yourself.
right.
I've been told
Right.
all kinds of things. And I'm just
Right.
like, so that's gonna get in the way of me asking for help.
Well, and there's a lot of executive functioning that goes into that, and there's a lot of processing. So if you have a racing brain or you have any, and you're an adolescent, so our brains start developing at the back, they go to the front, and you're halfway in the middle somewhere, and we expect these well-oiled machines. That's not neurotypical development for an adolescent or a child to then be able to go, right now, I think I should go blah, blah, blah. And for some of our kids, they can. But for a lot of our kids, that's a high risk activity to then go, I have to process that I'm feeling this way. I have to
Mhm,
remember that I have to do this. And then I have to go verbalize this to somebody. It's a
mhm.
lot of steps. It really is.
It is, and people don't understand like how many steps it is for a child to get there. You can't just say my door's always open,
Right.
but then have a tone with it. Those kids
Yes.
read the tone. They read in between the
Hmm.
lines, not everybody is
Hmm.
literal. And what you say again and how you behave different.
Yeah.
So where's that level of trust? So our actions have to match our words, when we have,
Yeah.
and even I have to go back every day and make sure that my actions match my words. So that is do I have anything to be done? And I do that on a daily basis with
Yeah.
my interactions. If they haven't gone the way that I thought they would have gone or something happened, I was like, is there an action step I can take here to do something different or do something better? Is there an apology I need to make? Is there,
Right.
this and that? But what I'm finding too is that a lot of times adults are impatient for
Hmm.
students to get like if a child is working on an addition problem and it's 3 plus
Hmm.
3, it's glaring to the adult that the
Hmm.
answer is 6, right? So they're impatient when the child's sitting there going, so then they're giving them the answers because it's
Okay.
easier to give them the answers. And then when the kids come to me and I'm making them think on their own, they're like, you're not helping me. And I'm like, oh, helping is doing it for you. Helping you is giving you the answers. I'm like, the answers. I'm helping you find out how you know the answers.
Right. Well, and I think you bring up a good point too, is that this goes back to this whose narrative is it? So I come in with my experience as an adult, but for a young person, if I say, and I've had to really try to get this out of my vocabulary with my own children and then the youth that I work with saying it's easy. Just because something is easy for me, it is so devaluing for a person that it's not easy for to hear that and expect that, well, why am I not getting it? Why am I? And then we start to get the self-worth stuff. I'm not good enough. I'm not fast enough.
Mhm.
I'm not smart enough. I'm not whatever enough. Right. And
Right.
so
There's
that,
this,
mhm,
it's a wounding, right? It's a wounding
yes.
that they take and carry with them the rest of their lives, and I
Right.
see a lot of students operate for the I'm not good enough because they internalize those comments as shame.
Yeah.
Just like with my parents or adults around me or teachers or intimate partners or whatever, they might not have given a look of thought to how they said things to me, but I learned that all like buried inside of me and penetrated my spirit, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I have to resolve some of these issues that people have said, even when it doesn't seem like a big deal to you, it doesn't mean that it's not a big deal to other people."
I'm glad you brought up shame. I think one of the things that was the most heartbreaking for me as a parent and as a professional, and I wouldn't say it's a day that I realized it, but there was definitely a turning point for me when I felt like I was hit by a truck and how I made sense of behavior. And I felt like all of these behaviors just being disrespectful, you're just being a jerk, you're just doing this to piss me off. And then all of a sudden I got hit by a truck and realized through some really hard situations that that's not what it was. So I was the adult making meaning based on a young person's experience, based on my own experiences, and then I learned that those behaviors, as you've said many a times, have a lot of layers and they were rooted in something else. And the other piece, and you just mentioned it, that went along with that was learning how much guilt and shame this young person had been holding. Like, I might get emotional now because as a parent, when I learned that, and I had been operating for years thinking this young person is just trying to be difficult, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces because not only was that child not trying to be difficult, but for years that child had been working their tail off trying to get it right. And after me and countless other adults said things like it's easy or, whatever, that guilt and shame, that cup was so full of it. And that guilt that then I felt as a parent, as a professional, and the shame. Do you see that with young people that you're working with? Do you see that with parents? Is it just me? What do
I
you know?
see that everywhere. I see it in
Okay.
teachers, I see it in classrooms, I see it in
Mhm.
administrators, I see it in parents and kids, especially those that get in trouble. And that reminds me, you asked me a bit ago about how do I make like parents see or teachers see, like what do I do with these systems. One very simple thing that I try to do is, I start small. So should is a very shaming word. So anytime we say I should do this, we're shaming
Mhm.
somebody, or you should do
Mhm.
that. So I tell teachers if they want to see some of a difference,
Mhm.
or to see how hard it is for some of these kids to change. Like we expect these kids to change, but we don't expect ourselves to change.
Mhm.
So I'm like, well, don't you remember learning? Don't you remember doing something different and having to do that takes time, right? And so your timeline is not my timeline. So I say, why don't you go a week? And if you really want to be brave, do 30 days and
Mhm.
replace your should with could to these students,
Mm.
and replace the should with could to yourself.
I love that. Well, and it's and it's right because it isn't it just about the students, it's about ourselves too, right?
Right.
We
And you
throw
can't
that our
say
Mhm.
right. And you don't. So a lot of times in education systems or in adult child interactions or just adult interactions, right? I see it in
Mhm.
workplaces too. It's not just
Mhm.
in schools
Mhm.
where, if we just say don't do that, well, it's
Mhm.
not giving them a replacement behavior. What
Mhm.
do I do?
Mhm.
You can't just
Yes.
say, don't do this. You have to give them something to do,
Yes. Yes, and so when
that
you say
choice.
replacement behavior, that's what you mean. So you instead of
Yes.
just telling them, "Don't go do that," you have to show them what to replace that
You show them what to
maladaptive
do, you
behavior
give
with.
them choices about what to
Mhm.
do. But first, that means that you have to take a beat and look at what am I okay with them doing? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like in the classroom, like
Good point.
what is that? Right? What
Yeah.
does that mean? Like I can give them choices, but like for instance, does math have to happen from 10 to 10:20 a.m.?
And do
And
you
is
have to
that
give
the
them
only
400
time math can
problems?
happen?
Yeah.
And is that the only time math can happen?
Right.
Like, can we have some flexible scheduling? What would that
Mhm.
look like in your classroom? What would
Yeah.
happen? Would you have less behavior problems if you change that one thing?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be like this whole grandiose thing. But there again, I think it's not big. Other people might think it's enormous.
Yeah.
And so you have to really define, okay, if I'm going to do inclusive education, if I'm going to do social emotional or relational education in my classroom, what does that mean? What does that look like? I have to, because teachers want something they can apply today. I just
Yeah.
gave you something. Should we
Yeah.
could. Flexible scheduling.
Right. But it requires me as the adult to challenge my own neural pathways, because for however many years I've been doing it the same way. And now you're
Exactly.
telling me to do it differently. And that's going to cause, it's like when I go to the gym, my body first pushes back and says, no, thank you. But I have to keep trying something because I'm trying to rewire those neural pathways. And that might be that my math class has to be flexible to meet the needs of the kids, because it's more important to make the system fit the needs of the kids, not the kids to fit the needs of the system.
Well, true, but also you have to understand you're not married to that, like in your own classroom. So,
Mhm.
like, wouldn't it be something if you could tell your principal you haven't had any referrals out of your class all year?
Right?
Wouldn't it be something to tell your parents that this child was always great because you learned how to work with them?
Right.
And
Right.
everything. And so you have to choose, where do I want to spend my time and energy?
Yeah.
And if you spend your time and energy on what the problem is, you will get more of the problem.
Yeah.
If
That's
you
well
spend your
said.
time and energy on the choices and dabbling in some of the solutions or
Mhm.
collaboration that could lead us to a sustainable answer,
Mhm.
then maybe you'll get that.
Yeah. So you've
So you
talked.
have to think about, what do you want?
Yes. So along those same lines, you're talking strategy. So if you could give, I can't believe like our time is almost up here. If you could give a few strategies, let's say 3, that are some of your biggest ones, whether it's for parents, whether it's for educators, those working with kids, and especially behaviors. We'll just stay on the behavior thing because that's probably the number one thing that we both see from folks. What would you give to them? What would you say? These 3 things, make sure you're doing these, you'll see a reduction in behavior.
Ooh,
Oh,
there's so
sorry, I
much
put you
here.
on the spot.
Okay.
Even if
No,
it's 1
no,
or
no,
2.
no,
Okay.
no. Let me give you one for just self-reflection.
Okay.
Okay. So if you do want to do this work and you do want to self-reflect as an educator or a parent, especially, I challenge you to write down your fears for 30 days. And that's your journal. That's your journal heading.
Fear about what?
My fear. My fear. So like when you are faced with a situation
Okay.
that you're spiraling out of control, or you're starting to get reactive, something really aggravates you, maybe as a student, a person, a situation, I want you to write about what your fears are.
Love that.
Because a lot of times our fears hold us back. And then we
Mm.
have to figure out, what would we do if that fear was taken away?
Mhm.
Right? But we first have to realize we have that fear. So I don't
Mhm.
know if a lot of parents or people realize when they have their fear and when they're reacting out of fear.
Mm.
So I would say that for self-reflective purposes on adult level, or if people want to do something reflective. Second of all, like for strategies in the classroom, I would say please take down your charts and clip charts and extrinsic rewards, like candy and stars and that kind of thing, because it's also shaming, because there are kids that go a whole entire year never getting a piece of candy or a star
Yeah.
because you're not meeting them where they're at.
Well, and the public stuff where everybody else can see how I'm performing. Ick.
Exactly. And then it creates this competition and this
Mhm.
people pleasing kind of stuff. And then it still perpetuates this shaming, right?
Mhm.
And um, yeah.
Well, and it's
So
very ableist because it very much, if you have a disability and your brain is wired for neurodiversity and you're not able to perform the way that others are, it just lends itself to, starts to bridge that divide even more.
right. Exactly. And it not only divides your relationship with the students, but it
Mhm.
divides students with potential friends, because now their friends are labeling them as not smart or bad.
Yeah, bad.
And
You get
same
that
same
label.
with the kids,
Mhm.
same with the kids that are being taken out of the room and you're excluding and yelling at them and shaming them all day long. They're not going to have a good chance of making friends because their
Mhm.
friends have labeled them the same way you have, because that's what
Yeah.
they've seen you do.
Yeah. No, I agree. Any other strategies? You've given us 2 good ones.
3, I would say, if, I guess like something I would do, I would really, because I found a lot of help in it, is focus on your movement. Are you moving every day? Are you walking? I do 10,000 steps a day, it's 4 miles. And when I'm going through grief, and a lot of kids, by the way, are going through grief, but that's probably for another time because that could be a whole another session in and of itself. But when there's grief, sorrow, sadness, anxiety, maybe depressive behaviors, or maybe you're just like in the wheels are always turning and they're having a hard time getting clarity. I think I pretty much talked about everybody in those adjectives, but work on something moving. And whether it's moving heavy objects, because that is very therapeutic for neurodiverse.
Yeah.
And also people in general, because it helps get some of this aggression and this tensity in our bodies out. So moving heavy objects is huge for a lot of neurodiverse kiddos. But because they want to show their power, right, in some way, so you need to give them an outlet to do that. But walking helps me immensely. And weights, or trying something new, doing a group exercise class. I did, if you read my blog last week, I did a deep stretch class, and I was like, what am I doing here? But I had to lean into the discomfort of frog pose, and it was one of the best things I decided to do for myself.
That's
and I was just like leaning into discomfort and frog pose, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And I was just thinking about like how my body is contracting and discontracting. But and I guess that's a bonus one. Slow down a minute and think about where you feel your feelings in your body.
Yeah. Well, and movement is important because it helps us re-regulate our system. And a lot of behaviors we see from young people or from anybody have to do with emotional dysregulation. And so to trigger your parasympathetic nervous system to help relax and calm the body, movement, lifting things, walking, frog pose, all of those things are great.
You can do math and movement. You can do English and movement. You can do social studies and movement. When I teach at the college level, I teach gen ed students, pre-service teachers, and I'm like, we're going to do this. It's integration. It's not about this time to this time we do this. It's about integrating all of the skills. So then that way we don't like turn off the learning after the bell rings, right? We want that integration. That's what we want to go for. And so that's where health education, and mental health meet.
I love it. So if people want to get a hold of you, they want to talk to you more, they want to read your stuff, they want to learn more about what you do, how do you want them to do that?
I prefer LinkedIn as an initial contact. I do have a contact form embedded in my link in the bio. You can also see some of the publications and book consultings that I've done. You can see a couple of case studies and get a little flavor about what I'm about. And you can DM me through LinkedIn, follow me. You can also find me on Medium. I just posted a new blog today. It's about being brave and taking off my cloak of invisibility.
I love that.
So yeah, especially for Halloween when everybody else is putting on their cloaks, I'm taking it off.
I love that. That's so important. Such a great topic. So you can go ahead and find Nikki Finn on LinkedIn. She has a ton of different links on her LinkedIn that you can go ahead and look at and follow. You can DM her. Nikki, it has been awesome being able to talk to you for this whole hour. You have such great strategy. Definitely check her out. Thanks again for coming, and I hope to be able to talk to you again soon because you are a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.